Hi, everyone. So we're going to give a few minutes for the people to join us on this first session. And so I do a bit of webinar series on Office 365, but I decided to also run another series where it will be a lot more, open form. And basically you can go in. I have some materials that I can prepare. Usually trying to get some blogs and posts, so I can run through that. But the idea right here with this meet to expert format is that basically you're able to interact and ask questions, and I will do my best to monitor that and see if I can bring some relevancy to that. So you should have access to the chat window. It should be on the right side of your panel. If we can check if the audio is okay first, that would be great. If anyone can jump in and comment if the audio is transmitting okay on your side, so that I'm not speaking alone. And then while we're waiting for the other people, what will be great is to see if you have already any particular subject that you would like to approach or any particular question. If not, what I was planning to discuss and present to you today is the differences between the SharePoint Online new experiences and the more classic experience. All right, great. Thank you, Nicholas. Cool. So again, I'm going to get started for the stuff that I need to do, like the review of SharePoint new experiences. But again, it's free format. I mean, that's the main difference between this and the webinar series that I do on, SharePoint, Power BI. So if you have any particular subject, feel free to just add that into the chat box. So I'm going to go in and I will try to monitor that. Governance section. Okay. Let's see if there's anyone else that wants to jump in, but I see that governance, that's actually a good question. And we can talk about it globally, although there are some really cool features on Office 365 that allows to extend that a little bit more. But while we're waiting for the other guys, let's talk about that. So governance within SharePoint environment. So a common approach, first it starts with rather you have like your governance policies, document or certain compliancy that you needs to be subjected to. But in the context of SharePoint and in the context of Office 365, there are some tools that you can leverage in order to report and review the governance and compliancy that you have set up on your globally Office 365 environment. So I'm going to show you that. It's on the admin panel right here. And so I've discovered it pretty late into my Office 365 journey, but there is a compliance center right here under the security and compliance. So obviously you need to be an Office 365 admin in order to access that. And the cool thing is, in regards to the data governance right here, you have like a few dashboards. So let's take a look at one of those, for example. So right here, you can see, again, it's an overall glance of your Office 365 governance. It doesn't is specific to just SharePoint. You're going to have your email, your OneDrive, and how you're doing it. at that. So you can click on those different reports and get a little bit of information. The cool thing is that if there's any, content search or audit that needs to happen, you're going to be able to run that too. It's weird. It shouldn't display like this. Let me refresh the page real quick. The monitoring. So when it comes to like data governance right here, there's a cool feature. I'm trying to look for it because I forgot. So this shows compliance report right here. So based on your region and based on your industry, you may want to be subject to certain compliance, like high tech is one of them, HIPAA is one of them. So in order to see how you're performing against that, you have the ability to just select. So for example, I'm in banking, save that. So that way you have a certain region and industry. And then after that, there's compliance reports that you can run. And right here are all the set of compliancy. So there's quite a bit of them that you can take a look at and see how you're performing against them. So it really depends on that first, right? Like how do you plan your governance is going to be based off, if you're subject to any compliancy. So that needs to be discovered first. But when you're doing, like the governance, from my experience doing consulting, when it comes to like a SharePoint audit and a SharePoint governance planning, we usually identify the different stakeholders in the different departments. So that's not related to the industry. That's not related to what I'm showing you here. Like this is the first level. Obviously, you need to know if you're going to be subject to any one of those compliancy regulations that are properly defined. And so once that is done, though, what I would usually do is try to identify the key stakeholder in each of the departments. And based off that, you're going to do an audit of the documents that they're working with. And not only the documents that they're working with, but all like the data that they're working with. Based off that, you do an inventory and then you do a classification of the information. So whether if the information is used at an internal level or if it's used across teams or it's shared with external partners, for example, or external parties. And if you plan that well, what you should end up with is a governance document. So there is, from my, I remember that back in 2013, but there is a template, the governance document template. And that is provided right here. That is provided by the Microsoft. And it's a good start. I mean, it definitely do its job. So you can download that from just typing Microsoft template governance. And let's open that up. It's been a bit of time since I've seen that, but that's not a document. It should be an Excel. How did they call that again? The governance planning sheet or something. Governance planning sheet. Let me take a look at that. Right here. I will put the link right here. And it should be an Excel document. always love TechNet because it's not template worksheet. I should have the link handy. Is it here? They don't have the document. This one. Let's take a look at this document. I thought they had like an Excel. No, it's not that one either. Okay. Well, so I will try to find it after this meeting right here and see if I can figure out where's that worksheet. But remember that it basically gives you like a template base for like the audit and inventory of the applications, the documents, the data, and then after that some labels for classification. Based off that, the way you impact this relatively to SharePoint is, well, set up the groups, right, accordingly, set up the right site map and the right site structure. And then after that, if the documents needs to be, constrained to within the organization, you're going to be able to set that up within your SharePoint admin center. So there are options that limit basically or permit the sharing of document externally, the number of documents that you can store, and so that needs to be managed and planned accordingly to the inventory. But the first step really will be that part. When it comes to sharing documents or having the ability to control that experience, a lot of the users that I interact with, they create the site, they go in, they add their structure, and they announce it to the group. It's like, hey, we now have SharePoint, and just use it. And so the problem is like not everyone within the organization will have the same level of understanding of the compliance of SharePoint, of Office 365 overall. So it results usually in a little bit of a chaos, right? So there are ways as an Office 365 admin, a SharePoint admin, that you can go in, and usually the strategy is to be a little bit more restrictive at first, or as restrictive as it can without affecting the business. And then after that, slowly through training, through user adoption, allowing them to be more permissive. And so a lot of the time what I see is like, well, they just create the site without even taking a look at those options that you have available. And so some of them are really, really key. So for example, the first one, and I think they put it up top for a specific reason, is the fact that, you're going to allow the end user to share content from SharePoint to the outside organization. And so that is basically the share button. And I think that it was a discussion topic during the last Ignite conference. But basically, that share button that you see is quite dangerous. If you don't train the user and allow them to understand the power of that button, they might overuse it, which may be a headache after that for, when you need to do an audit, or when you have like permissioning structure that you need to review. It's just going to make the whole stuff complicated. But out of the box, when you activate the site, when you create a new site, this is going to be like allow sharing to authenticated user. So let me show you that from one of the site collection. Let me navigate to one of those. If you go to this one, you're going to notice that, oops, actually, that's not the right one. if you go to this one, you're going to notice that all of the document library, so let me navigate to one of those. Here, there's some documents, so that's good. That's a good example. So this new doc, for example, then you have the share button. Not only do you have the share button, but you can create a new link and provide access to anyone if you wanted to. So here I've restricted that on this particular site, right? This organization is preventing you from selecting this option, but out of the box, though, this is turned on. So that could be pretty damaging, because once you send the link, although there is an expiration period, the link is still like available for that person to reshare it. So imagine that you have like some you know, financial documents or IP documents that are very you know, secretive for the organization. You probably don't want to allow that options whatsoever on that site collection, right? And so that needs to be controlled and architected before you even open the gates for the end user to start adding content. And in order to do that, you'll need to understand what they're currently working with and who are they working with on those documents or data, right? So that is going to be key. So that's one of the features, like controlling, obviously, the sharing capabilities on the SharePoint side. So we talked about, you know, taking a look at what global level, you know, compliance you are subject to. Then after that, setting up proper site map, site structure, and site groups, and obviously considering about the features that are inheriting from SharePoint, making sure that you're adjusting or setting those up according to the business need. So other features that you can control is who you can share outside of the organization. So even if you're permissive, you say, well, you know what, we're going to allow the end user to share some of the content. Let's say that you have a partner's site collection in SharePoint, and that this is being used by the sales team to be able to share documents, templates, presentation to the external world. So you have that specific area, but still then you want to make sure that, well, if you're going to share it to the external world, do you need to share it with anyone, or do you need to share it with specific user that I would be able to control and review, right? And so when you're allowing the option to share externally, you also have the options to control the domains, right? So if you're working with a dozen partners, for example, and you know, and they're fixed, you have the ability to control which domain account your end user are going to be able to share it with. And that is important because, again, what I've seen quite a bit of time for smaller organizations is just like, well, create a site, let it open, and everyone can share it with everyone. The problem down the road is that it gets overshared, and then they just don't know what they share with who, right? So again, being restrictive first and slowly being more permissive as time allows, training and resources is probably the preferred method right here. So you can control the sharing at the global level. That means that this applies for any SharePoint sites, right? So for example, you can also limit, you know, this is the options I was telling you about, the sharing with certain domains. So for example, if I were to say, well, I only want to share with those guys, oops, I can't even type that correctly. And maybe like Microsoft.com, for example, then that will mean that only those two domains and the associated user will be able to receive external link, which is a nice feature. It's something to think about ahead. Once you set up that at the global level, you're going to be able to, per site collection, control part of the sharing. So right here, this is all of my site collections and options that are available for me based off the sharing features that I turn on or off is going to be this right here, this sharing option, and this only applies for that specific site collection. So again, you know, understanding the different teams that you have, the different departments, and the objective is going to be important because you're going to architect the site collection based off that. If everyone have the same, you know, on that specific site collection, have the same type of sharing power and sharing privilege, you want to make sure that you allow or you disable the sharing capabilities. So in this case right here, for that specific site collection, I'm going to be able to override the sharing capabilities that I've set up per default, and being able to say, well, you know what, I want to allow to share, or I don't want, I want to limit per the domains and whatnot. What are other features that we can think of when we're doing governance setup for a SharePoint site? Well, if you go to the site permission right here, and this is based off the new experience, so I don't know what version you're on, Arita. If you are on the old version, you might see something that looks more like this. Where are my site content and site settings? Right here. So right here, making sure that you set up those properly. And so usually I can show you some examples of our implementation. So for example, this is one for clients. They're not on Office 365, they're actually on SharePoint 2016. SharePoint 2013 on premises. But what we've established for them is that for their site collection and for all the different departments, the sharing privileges are the same. The collaboration is at the same level. That means it's just internal within the user of the organization. And therefore, we created like different departments. And on each of those departments, let's say the programs and grants, for example, on any of those tools or lists or whatnot, you're going to notice that if you go to the site settings and you go to the site permission, only the people from 3 different groups for each one of those departments are able to interact with the system. So that means that projects, people will only have access to the projects, and that's set by setting up the right permission. Best practices is to have, you know, 3 groups for each one of those, even though they're empty. You have visitors group, which is like read access, members group for editing rights, and then the owners group, which maintains that particular subsite or site. And yeah, based off that, you know, limiting the number of unique permission or broken permission, because you can actually delete, you know, inherit from the parent side, but limiting that type of interaction just make it a lot easier. So I'm going to jump to another, oh, okay, and 2013, and want to move to SPO. Great. I'm going to jump into Nicholas' question on recommendation to increase user adoption. And actually, I get this question a lot. Let me pull this up, actually. This is kind of funny because I tend to blog a bit, and I'm on Quora. So, you know, like, I didn't know this platform until 1 month and a half ago. And what is funny is that, well, I'm not here to promote Quora, but people ask questions about SharePoint, right? And it goes from anything to everything. And the one that comes back a lot is how do I increase user adoption for my end user, right? So I did answer this a few times, but I'm going to try to recap it here. Again, too many times I think, the business is encountering a challenge, which is like, we want to centralize all of the data. This is one of the things. We want to increase productivity. We want to decrease email overload. We want to decrease meeting times, or useless meeting times, I guess. And we want that to be quick, efficient, and cost effective. And so like all of those conditions usually tends, you have Salesforce.com, you have Office 365, or at the very least SharePoint, and we want to centralize all of that data so that it's searchable, right? There was a recent data that I was taking a look at from the McKinsey report on collaboration from last year, where it says that an employee will spend in average 1.8 hours looking for information in order to do their job. And so, put that into perspective, it's quite a bit of time just spent searching. So that's where it all drills down to, we should have a SharePoint. Let's have it. We have it on our Office 365 SharePoint license, on our Office 365 license. Let's just turn one on and ask everyone to dump the documents there. We as the IT would take care of the permissions, and they will use it. Well, the reality is, SharePoint is very capable of, it gets the feature set in order to enable you to do compliancy, in order to enable you to audit, to have restriction, automation, but end user tends to freak out when they go into the system. And so the first one, how to get user adoption, is really training. Most of the groups that we work with, we start with, user training base, right? Making sure that they understand what they're doing, that they understand the sharing, that they understand the permission, that they understand metadata, that they understand OneDrive for Business, if that you're using that in conjunction with SharePoint. And that is really key, because without the end user fully understanding the set of tools that they have in their hand, they're not going to understand the leverage that they have, and therefore, eventually not use the tool at all. Second thing, I think, beside training, like doing user training, user adoption training is important. Second thing is being listening. If you're part of the IT team, it's like having a ticketing system, or like an email distribution list, so that you can collect all of that feedback from the end user. It's really key, because things that tends to be obvious for the person that implements it might not be for the end user. And so if they feel like, well, we have SharePoint, I've heard feedback about it, they kind of use it, but every time that we have questions, or I get frustrated, there's really nothing that can turn around to get support. So just making sure that whoever is responsible for the implementation establish it. And so we usually, that as consultant coming for working with the IT team or on behalf of the IT team of a company, we usually establish that from the get-go. So we have a ticketing system in place so that they can email that, and we make sure that we follow up with them and that we answer that question if we can. Third thing that increase user adoption is, for me, and this is, I think, personal, although it might differ with Microsoft line of vision nowadays, is really the user interface. I think that if the end user is struggling to access some of the information, although it's there, it's in the system, but it's just like 15 level of navigation down, and that you're not finding what you're looking for, you're just, I mean, it's going to be a useless platform. Although there's, again, lots of power, lots of features available. If the user interface make it scary or make it unusable, the end user is just going to turn away from the solution, right? So on most of the solution that we've implemented over the years, like we've always added, even if it's light, you know, a simplification of the navigation, a simplification of the user interface, so that it doesn't feel that scary. So this one is one example. We have another one right here that I open up. Let me see, where is it? Right here. So this one is a package that we usually deploy for some of our clients, which makes it a lot simpler, right? Like you get all the features that you would expect from an intranet. You get some e-office features, but you're able to navigate to the content in a way that is, you know, like a website. And therefore, it does drive the user adoption. You know, like people feel more inclined to use the system if they're going to be able to quickly find the information that they want or know where they're standing within the sitemap of the site. Fourth things that we've implemented with some of the user is, well, you know, adding value to the platform, right? So it starts like this. It starts usually with your announcement, like the events. You know, you add like the calendars from different teams, from different, like from the CEO or the executive team, so that you get transparency or visibility across the organization, right? That's the first step. Then you start automating some of the process, and whether it's graphic design request forms, absence request forms. We had per diem, you know, requests for reimbursements. We had CEO Connect request form, like forms that are valuable for the organization. Perhaps even, you know, like a paper format right now, and that could be converted to a digital experience, is helping drive the user adoption. If it's something that is, you know, helping them connect with another team, another individual, or just work overall faster, right? So in this case, for example, this team right here that we're working on, their marketing team have a very simple form in order to enable the end user to create graphic design requests on, you know, their website, their brochure, and whatnot. And so here, this is a pretty standard SharePoint form. It was done pretty quickly. There's nothing crazy about it, but it allows the end user to go in, navigate through it easily, and then just being able to perform their request. Not only that, but they do get feedback. So once the item gets entered, then you get you know, a view of all of the requests that you've done. So really, like, trying to do that, you know, like requests and forms is a good value added for the intranet platform. Another one too is approval processes, whether it's procurement, you know, RFP, RFQ, RFI, little things that needs to be purchased within the office that usually go through a longer process. If you can try to automate that through SharePoint workflows, Nintex workflows, Microsoft flows, and make it easier for them, then I think that does drive the user adoption. So hopefully that was, you know, a good recap right here. So I think it's like what training that you can really avoid, but I think it's really important actually, because those are, you know, enterprise tools. We're learning to work collaboratively, and so if there's no rules or initial discussion with the end user, it's just not going to make it easy as you grow, right? I mean, I know a lot of people use Slack nowadays, or we use Teams internally, but if you don't set up some kind of structure or naming convention or policies or procedures, the end user is just going to take that as, you know, free for all, and that's when chaos comes. Second one was establishing a line of connection. So whether it's a ticketing system, distribution list, email. Third one, if you can, is through the user interface or user experience. Again, you don't have to go something full-fledged, something totally crazy and super, impressive in terms of like the front end or the user experience, but even just nicely laying down the navigation, just being able to make it clear for the end user, so that they don't feel lost or they don't feel like they're not able to find what they're looking for is important. And then finally, the fourth one is through requests or automation, adding business value to the internet so that you're really driving them to use the platform more and more. And then the final one I will say, and I didn't mention it previously, but it's through, and this is one is after you've done the 4 first, is really like gamification. So being able to, have some little contests. I know that for several teams, we have like in their announcement, they put pictures of the employees when they were younger, try to find who it is. It drives a little bit of life and culture within the organization and within the internet. All right, let me see where we stand. Hopefully that answers your question, Nicholas. We have 4 terabytes of data and we want to move to SPO. How do we plan our migration? Okay, so yeah, we do a lot of migration. So this is an interesting subject. When it comes to like data migration, the first thing that I will need to ask, and the first thing is like, where's the data currently living? I mean, if it's from SharePoint strictly to SharePoint Online, then it's fine. But if it's like, well, we have a little bit on SharePoint, we have a little bit on Google Drive and Dropbox, and some users use Box, we have a file share system internally, and then we have a Hog server, someone else replicating. Understanding where is the data, like all the systems, is important, right? So that's the first thing. It seems like you are coming from a SharePoint to SharePoint. So there are good tools that will do the job. It depends on the volume, but 4 terabytes, I will say that it's quite significant. So one of the premier tool, again, we're not sponsored by them or anything like that to do this session, but ShareGate does have a pretty good tool to move things over to Office 365 from a SharePoint on-premises environment. So it's a good tool. I don't know what's their license. I think it's like $4,000 to $5,000 per year, and then you can use it as much as you want during that year. There's no like limit, but yeah, if it's a strict SharePoint, all of the data is already structured there, kind of, and then we want to move to SharePoint Online, I will use one of those tools. The only complication is if you're using SharePoint and a file share system and other systems, right? So, for example, the reason why I say that is that we have few clients in our portfolio that are in the construction business. And as part of that, they're using and they're leveraging a lot of AutoCAD files. And AutoCAD files are typically like, few gigabytes of data. First, it goes against the SharePoint file limit. I mean, 15 gigabytes is the max per item that SharePoint can handle according to the limit threshold. So those files, the AutoCAD file, or large presentation file, or report files are huge, might exceed that 15 gigabyte limit over time. The other thing too is that they're meant to be multi-collab, but in an office and through the AutoCAD software. So retrieving it from the online version, it's not always the best. And then after that, it depends on the geography. I mean, we have few hubs in Asia, and so where the internet connection is flaky, let's put it that way sometimes, you can't just rely on the SharePoint Online, which is not a problem if you're operating from the States, or I would say North America and Europe, right? But those three things will be put into consideration. It's like where the data is coming from, what type of data, and where you're migrating it into. Oh, okay, so you do have a file share system. I know all users don't need 4 terabytes or even 2 terabytes. How to clean all of that? Well, yeah, okay, so you're on SharePoint 2013, you get 4 terabytes after a few years of utilization, and now the cleanup comes. Well, so I would definitely take a look at that tool because it allows you to come up with an inventory. We have a script that we repurpose. It's a PowerShell script that allows you to get, you know, so you run PowerShell online, so you need to have access to the server, right? But you run that script and basically you're able to get all of the documents library, the latest touch documents, and the count of items as well as the estimated file size. But in terms of like who owns what and what needs to be migrated, that relies to the stakeholder. I mean, you have to talk with their business and ask them to do a cleanup. I've experienced that even prior to the Office 365 and SharePoint Online version where we were migrating from 2010 to 2013, right? And so my plan at that time with the organization was to take the different stakeholders of different departments and then basically come up with a cleaning period. So you tell them like, well, we're about to move you to 2013. In your case, Arita, it's going to be, you know, SharePoint Online. And we really need you as data owner to do a data cleanse, right? You're the stakeholder of that specific department. The documents integrity and security relies on them, right? So you have to get that sense from the end user too. It's like they need to have a responsibility towards the documents and the data that they're storing and that they're using, because it's one thing to store it and collaborate on it, but if there was a leak or if there was inappropriate data that was stored there, they would be the first one to blame too, right? They can't turn around to IT and say, hey, why is this document stored there? I have no idea what it is. Well, if you explain them the rule of the game and tell them, well, you have responsibility into the documents within your department, let's say that it's compartmentalized into department, then you tell them, well, you have that, then you have to do a cleanup. You could probably inventory through the PowerShell script. I'm happy to share that with you. There's good PowerShell script already built out right there, and you can just leverage that. But the reality is that if you get the list of all of the document as IT or as developer, are you going to be able to know which one is relevant for them? This is up for the business to know, and they're representing the business. So once you do that cleanse period, then use one of those tools. If it reduces it down considerably, then I would suggest, well, can you do that manually, right? Are you able to pull that manually? If it's, we're talking about 50 gigabyte or 100 gigabyte after the cleansing, if you're able to do that manually, or really manually, meaning that you get like some interns and they just pour over the documents in the proper bucket, then that's fine. If it's semi-manual, meaning that you save site template or list template, or another method is to use the Open in Explorer, copy all of that. So okay, let me explain this method because it's a good one. So there's one way to do it from SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Prem to SharePoint Online. Is basically open in Explorer. You have a document library with 4,000 items. Open it in Explorer. In another part of your computer, you have SharePoint Online open, sync using your OneDrive for Business. And so you're basically opening that through Explorer too. All you need to do is copy, drag and drop. You can only do that if it's some kind of manageable size that you're trying to move across, right? And that you don't care about the last modified by. If you have like enterprise metadata on it, if you have some type of need to keep track of the last modified by, created by, like all of those metadata, I would seriously recommend and take a look at ShareGate, just because it's like they have a nice interface. You just drag and drop and it will do the job, right? But if you're cringed by the license price and you have to turn to alternatives that are manual, then yeah, just having the on-premises open in File Explorer and having the online open through your OneDrive for Business and drag and dropping will work too. So I'm wondering, hopefully that was useful. If not, I'm happy to take another question. Yeah, the metadata, yeah. If the metadata is something that you need to port over, then, you know, ShareGate will probably be one of the tools that you want to use. Because before, right, like 2010 to 2013, 2013 to 2016, you would do like an in-place migration, so database attached migration. So you just take your database, like your SharePoint database, and just move it over, and then it will be fine. SharePoint to SharePoint Online can't really do that. You don't have access to the SQL in the backend, right? So if you need to do that, it's through a third-party tool. I think that will be the easiest, especially on 4 terabyte. I mean, 2 terabyte. I'm reading your question, actually. We do have a metadata hub. Not sure how we will translate it to Office 365. So you still have like metadata and the enterprise metadata store on SharePoint Online. That is no problem. And what you can do is export it from your on-premises environment and import it into your SharePoint Online. That is no problem. But you need to do that prior to the data migration, right? So let me see, where is the enterprise metadata? Metadata store, that's the name. It should be around here. Metadata. Term store, right? Sorry. So the term store right here. So this is SharePoint Online, right? And so you will notice that it's a very similar experience than the SharePoint 2013, which is the version that you have. So as long as you export it, re-import it here, you shouldn't have any major problem. And even 2010 have a very similar experience. Let me go to this. 2013 have a very similar experience. So top level site, term store management. Yeah, I remember uploading those into SharePoint Online. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So right here. And again, through script, you export that, and the import is done through the UI. So yeah, it's possible. All right. Well, I mean, we're coming close to 10 minutes. I didn't even cover, the SharePoint new experience. Hopefully, all of that was useful. If there's anything that you feel will be good to approach next time, feel free to let me know or here or via email, so that I can cover that in the next session. But yeah, hopefully those information were useful. All right. Well, if it's it, then I guess we can log off early. Again, hopefully that session was useful. I will try to recap that. Some of the questions and provide written answer, or at least few of the links and documents that I can share with you, so that you can have that handy. All right, and I might not do that right after this, but I will try to do it before the weekend, so that we kind of have a nice agenda for you to discuss. All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. If you want to email me, I'm just going to drop that into the chat window so you can find me at here. Yeah, that's my email. And yeah, any questions, I'm always happy to take them. Okay, well, the new user experience. Okay, we have a few minutes. So, yeah, so what I've noticed, and that was kind of like the point with this session, is that on SharePoint Online, and that came through one of our clients. So there's two ways to create SharePoint site. One of them is through the admin center, right? Like you go in, you create your site collections, and you're set. The other one is through here, right here, which will feel the most natural way of creating a new site because it's called SharePoint right here. And so when you create a site here, with the new experience now, you have the ability to create a team site, which we'll pretty use. You have the ability to create a communication site, which have the new UI, right? And I was planning to go over that. So let's go ahead and create that. And they have some template, some new UI too, which I was curious about. So I was planning to explore that today with the team. So let's say that we do a topic. I'm just going to call that the topic template. Okay. So they have that new UI, which I've played around a little bit with it. And for example, like pages makes it very easy to create pages. But what I found was you do lose a little bit of the customization that you could do with SharePoint, a classic experience, right? So this is like the new experience right here. This is how they present the news and the events and the documents and the comments right here. And when you create a new page right here, you have the ability to select multiple templates right here. And again, to be honest with you, well, how much time do we have left? 6 minutes. It is a little clunky, I think. To have to choose prior to even going into the page what layout you're going to do. I mean, nowadays, a lot of the platforms, you just create a page and you choose the layout on the go, right? Here, they're kind of like forcing you to choose that. But let's say that I want to create a multi-con. Then right here, you can see that this is like the new experience for editing pages. So you have like the name of the page right here, you have the paragraph and the layout. I don't think I can even interact with that layout at all. It's pretty much set right here, which is fine. but you're going to notice too that you have less less web parts available. So right here, there's the cool one is the Power BI. Where is it? The Power BI web part, which allows you to pull the reports and display them directly here. But yeah, like a lot of the things that we were used to, like content search query web part, the filter, the media content, the script editor, all of that is gone. Oh, well, I mean, so let me take back the question. I cannot customize my modern UI at all. Yes, you can, but within the confined experience of this right here. This is what they're giving you. And I used to do a lot of branding webinar session. This no longer applies on those pages created through the modern experience. It's basically, I believe, right? It's Microsoft's way of saying, well, don't customize anymore your SharePoint. You can only customize what I'm giving you. And so I'm sure that they're going to pull up more parts right here. I mean, this is just the beginning. I remember when I first started that there was not even like there was a list preview or whatnot, but you know, even the list is in preview, right? So the ability to pull from a SharePoint list is still in preview. So I don't think it's the full completed product. And I think that they're still developing on it. But in terms of, yeah, the direction where Microsoft is going is like, well, you know, no more master page or page layouts, you know, like we're going to give you the experience and then you build your pages, your content, your list, your document library within the confine of the experience that we're providing to you. And I think that's what's going to happen. Now, when they're going to do it, the new experience is actually interlacing with the classic experience. So here on this topic site, I can create a new page experience, which is cool. But I can also go to the site content and go to the site pages and create a page in a more classic fashion. So if I go new right here and site page, I believe that that will create new page normally. Oh. How do I do that again? Oh, I need to return to classic experience right here. So now we're in the classic. Go to files, new document. They restricted that. Yeah, new. I'm kind of still exploring with that too. Yeah, so they're forcing it now. They're forcing it. If not, what we can do is like go to the site content. Hopefully this is still available. Go to the settings and activate the publishing site features. So it should be under site collection features, which is right here. And then turn on the publishing features here. So that will allow you to, oh, okay. So that was my guess. That was the thing that was how we're doing on time. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to cover that really quickly because the whole subject, I mean, why I picked up this one came from a client. When we try to do content type, custom content type on the site created from the communication experience, it will give you an error. The funny thing is that this site right here, which is typical, I would say, like naming convention for site collection, right? When you go to the SharePoint admin, it's actually not there. That's the really new thing, I guess, is that it's not treated, this topic site is not treated as a site collection that you're managing. So if I go to my SharePoint admin center, right here, although we just created it, the only difference is that we use the communication site. And this site doesn't appear here. So what I recommended to my client was, well, you know, because leverage the content type heavily, don't use the SharePoint, waffle quick links right here to create the site. Rather go here to the SharePoint Admin Center in order to create it. And if you take a look at it right here, there's no topic. Like the topic site that we just created is not there. Right? It should be like site topic. It's not there. So yeah, like it seems like when you're using the new experience, SharePoint or Microsoft is basically preventing you from customizing some of the default feature that we're used to from 2013 or 2016 or the previous SharePoint classic experience. So that's something to be careful of. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I probably approach that subject anyway on a blog or during the next session, but something to consider. I want to thank you for joining the session. If you have any feedback on the session, please let me know. If you have any topics that you would like to approach next time, let me know too. And I try to do that on a regular basis, on a every 2 weeks basis at the very least. All right. All right. So again, thanks. And yeah, let me know if you have any question. Have a good one.